Smoke still clung to Alpha's armor as he stepped through the ship's corridor, his boots echoing against the metallic floor. The faint hum of the engines barely registered over the pounding of his heart. Lyra's limp form rested in his arms, her breath shallow, her skin pale. Stray strands of her silver hair clung to his cheek as he pressed her closer, ignoring the ache in his injured shoulder. Around him, crew members parted without a word, their gazes heavy with unspoken questions. The medbay door slid open with a hiss. Alpha crossed the threshold, his steps quickening as the medical team rushed forward. Energy monitors flickered to life as Lyra was gently lifted from his arms and placed onto the diagnostic platform. Alpha's hands lingered at her side until a medic stepped between them. "Her energy levels are dangerously unstable," the lead physician said, eyes fixed on the display. Whatever she did to override that failsafe pushed her system to the brink. "We need to stabilize her before the fluctuations damage her neural pathways." Alpha clenched his fists at his sides. "Do whatever it takes." The room buzzed with controlled urgency as medics attached biosensors and adjusted stabilizers. A faint pulse of blue light surrounded Lyra's body, the wax technology seeking to harmonize her erratic energy flow. Alpha remained still, every muscle tense as he watched the faint rise and fall of her chest. Memories of the mission flashed through his mind, the countdown, Vorak's last strike, the heat of the explosion as they fled the collapsing flagship. But none of it mattered now. Only she did. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The monitors began to steady, and the tension in the room lessened. The lead physician approached Alpha, wiping sweat from his brow. "We've stabilized her for now, but her system needs time to recover. Her energy core is still fluctuating, which means she'll experience fatigue, dizziness, and possible neural feedback when using her abilities. She needs rest, no exceptions." Alpha nodded, but his gaze remained on Lyra. Even in her weakened state, she seemed to radiate a quiet strength, her features serene despite the battle raging within her. His fingers curled slightly as if reaching for her, then stilled. Without another word, he turned and stepped back from the platform, giving the medic space to continue their work. But as he moved toward the exit, he glanced back one last time. "I need you to wake up, Lyra," he whispered. "I can't face this war without you." The medbay door slid shut behind him, and Alpha stood still, the weight of command settling once more upon his shoulders. The council chamber buzzed with heated debate, the air thick with the clash of voices. Holograms of distant star systems flickered above the central table, projections of the Trion fleet's movements casting an ominous glow across the crystalline walls. Alpha sat at the head of the table, shoulders taut, eyes fixed on the pulse of light within his clenched hands, faint traces of his energy manipulation escaping as his thoughts drifted to Lyra. Her pale face, her shallow breaths, the fragile rise and fall of her chest haunted every corner of his mind. "Alpha, are you even listening?" The sharp voice of Counselor Thaler cut through the noise. Alpha's gaze snapped upward, meeting Thaler's piercing amber eyes. The counselor leaned forward, palms pressed against the smooth surface of the table. "The Trions will regroup. We cannot afford hesitation. We must strike now while they're vulnerable." "And risk more lives?" Counselor Seraph countered, her voice firm yet measured. "Our people are not soldiers. Another offensive could break what little spirit remains. We should focus on fortifying wax and preparing for the next assault." Alpha's silence stretched between them, amplifying the tension. His heart pulled in two directions, the duty to protect his people and the ache of knowing Lyra lay unconscious in the medical sanctum, her life hanging by a thread. A part of him yearned to abandon the council chamber, to sit beside her and wait for any sign of her return. But the weight of leadership held him in place. "Alpha, say something." Thaler's voice echoed with frustration. "You led us into the heart of the enemy and returned victorious, but now—" "I know what I've done," Alpha interrupted, his voice low but steady. He straightened in his seat, though the exhaustion behind his eyes betrayed the strength in his posture. "But I will not sacrifice more lives without reason. I need time to think. This war isn't just about strategy, it's about survival. We won't win by rushing headlong into battle. The council exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of concern and doubt. Alpha could feel their unease, their leader, once resolute, now weighed down by grief and uncertainty. Yet beneath the turmoil in his heart, a flicker of determination remained. He would find a way to save both his people and the woman who had become his strength. "We reconvene tomorrow," he declared, rising from his seat. Without another word, he turned and left the chamber, the echoes of the council's whispers fading as the crystalline doors slid shut behind him. Lyra's eyelids fluttered open, her vision hazy as soft light filtered through the medical bay. The distant hum of energy resonators buzzed faintly in the background. As her eyes adjusted, the first thing she saw was Alpha, seated beside her with exhaustion carved into his features. His gaze met hers, and in that instant, a flood of emotions passed between them: relief, fear, and the fragile thread of love unspoken. Alpha leaned forward, cupping her face gently, his touch warm against her cool skin. "You're awake. I thought I lost you." Her lips parted to respond, but a sharp pulse of pain rippled through her chest, forcing her breath to hitch. The energy within her stirred, volatile and restless, like a caged storm pressing against fragile walls. "Don't push yourself," Alpha whispered, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. For a moment, the chaos of war faded, leaving only the space between them, a connection forged through battles and burdens. Before they could say more, the distant chime of the War Council's summons echoed through the corridor. Alpha's shoulders tensed. "I have to go," he murmured, reluctance heavy in his voice. Lyra tried to sit up, but the surge of unstable energy within her flared, sending pain lancing through her veins. She clenched the sheets, her breath shallow as she fought to steady the power threatening to overwhelm her. As Alpha rose to leave, their eyes met once more, his gaze holding a silent promise that, no matter the war raging outside, he would return to her. Lyra stood in the training chamber, energy crackling around her hands as she pushed herself harder with each breath. Her heart pounded from exhaustion, but she refused to stop. The memory of her collapse on the Trion flagship haunted her, the moment she'd been powerless when Alpha needed her most. "Lyra, that's enough," Alpha's voice echoed across the chamber. His tone was firm, but his eyes betrayed his worry. He approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You need to rest." "I can't," she shot back, shaking his hand off. "Every second we waste, the Trions grow stronger. I won't stand on the sidelines while you risk your life." "That's not what I'm asking." "You nearly died, Lyra." "I can't," Alpha's voice caught, and he clenched his fists. "I can't lose you. And I can't lose you either." Lyra's voice cracked, her energy surging uncontrollably for a moment before she managed to suppress it. "But if I don't learn to control this power, I'll be a liability when you need me most. I have to do this. For you. For our people." Alpha stepped closer, his gaze intense. "We fight together, but not at the cost of your life. This is my choice, Alpha." Lyra's chest heaved as she fought to hold back tears. "I love you, but I won't stand aside while you face this war alone." Silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken fears. Alpha's jaw tensed as if he wanted to argue, but the fire in Lyra's eyes made him pause. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving Lyra standing alone, energy flickering around her trembling hands. Whispers in the dark, intelligence reveals that the Trions are constructing a second, more advanced weapon capable of bypassing planetary defenses. Time is running out, but the Council is divided, further intensifying Alpha's frustration. The air in the council chamber is thick with tension as voices clash. Some demand swift action, while others urge caution, fearing another costly failure. Alpha stands at the center, silent but seething, his mind clouded by the weight of command and his worry for Lyra. Late at night, Alpha stands alone on a balcony overlooking the city of crystalline spires bathed in faint blue light. His gaze drifts to the distant horizon where the stars seem to pulse with unseen threats. Footsteps echo softly behind him. "Lyra, Wrapped in a cloak against the chill, steps beside him, her presence both a comfort and a reminder of his fear. She places a hand on his arm, but he stiffens. "Alpha, I know what you're thinking," she says softly. "You're afraid of losing me again." He turns, eyes shadowed. "I can't watch you risk your life. Not after. I'm not broken." Lyra's voice is firm despite the lingering weakness in her body. "I won't stand by while our people suffer. We both have roles to play in this war. Let me help." Before Alpha can respond, a faint hum resonates through the air, a distant pulse of energy only they can sense. Lyra gasps, her eyes glowing faintly as an unseen force brushes against her mind. Alpha catches her as she staggers. "It's them," she whispers, clutching his arm. "The Trions. They're moving faster than we thought." Realizing the urgency, Alpha holds her close for a moment longer, then steps back, determination hardening his features. "If we're going to stop them, we need to act now. Together." Lyra nods, her resolve clear despite the risks. The distant hum fades, but its warning lingers in the air. The race against time has begun. The night air carried a faint hum of distant energy pulses, a constant reminder of the war that loomed beyond the city walls. Yet here, on the balcony of the central tower, the world seemed to pause. Alpha stood motionless, his gaze lost in the vast expanse of crystalline spires bathed in silver moonlight. The faint reflection of stars shimmered on his armor, casting faint glimmers that danced across the smooth surface. Soft footsteps echoed against the crystalline floor as Lyra approached. She paused a few steps away, hesitant yet drawn to the figure before her. His shoulders, usually squared with resolve, now sagged beneath the invisible weight of duty and fear. "Alpha," she whispered. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers. In their luminous depths, she saw exhaustion, sorrow, and something deeper, an ache that mirrored her own. "I thought you were resting," he said, his voice low and rough with unspoken emotion. "I couldn't sleep." Lyra stepped closer, the faint hum of her unstable energy brushing against his awareness. "Neither could you." For a moment, neither spoke. The distant hum of the city's energy fields and the faint whispers of the wind filled the silence. Lyra reached out, her fingers brushing his arm. The warmth of her touch seemed to break through the walls he'd built around himself. "I thought I'd lost you," Alpha murmured. His hand found hers, fingers curling tightly as though afraid she might vanish. "When I saw you collapse, when I couldn't reach you. I've never known fear like that." Lyra's heart ached at the raw vulnerability in his voice. She stepped closer, her other hand resting gently against his cheek. "But I'm here. I'm still here." His eyes searched hers as if seeking reassurance in the depths of her gaze. The barriers that had kept them apart, the fear, the duty, the war, seemed to crumble in that moment. Lyra could feel the pulse of his energy beneath her fingertips, strong and steady yet tinged with sorrow. "Lyra, I can't lose you," Alpha admitted, his voice barely more than a breath. "Not now. Not ever." Emotion swelled within her, raw and undeniable. Her heart pounded as she stepped closer still, until there was nothing between them but the faint hum of their intertwined energy. Alpha's hand slid to her waist, tentative yet firm, anchoring her in the moment. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," Lyra whispered. Her eyes searched his, finding the same longing reflected there. "I want to fight beside you. I want to be with you." Their breaths mingled in the cool night air, tension crackling between them like the silent pulse of distant stars. And then, as if drawn by an invisible force, their lips met. The world seemed to fall away. Alpha's arms wrapped around her, pulling her against the warmth of his body as their kiss deepened. Lyra clung to him, her fingers curling against the plates of his armor as if holding on to something she could no longer deny. Energy flickered faintly between them, not of power, but of something more profound, a connection that transcended the chaos of war. When they finally parted, their breaths mingling in the still night, neither spoke. No words could capture the weight of what had passed between them. But as Alpha rested his forehead against hers, Lyra knew that whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together. The air in Lyra's chamber crackled with residual energy as she sat cross-legged on the crystal floor, her hands resting on her knees. The Nexus core pulsed faintly within the vault beneath her feet, a distant heartbeat she had come to feel within her very bones. Eyes closed, she reached out with her mind, delving into the energy currents flowing from the core. The world around her faded into silence until only the rhythm of her breath and the core's resonance remained. A sudden surge of power jolted through her chest, stealing her breath away. Her eyes shot open, but she no longer sat in her chamber. Instead, she stood on a battlefield shrouded in smoke and ash. Crimson skies burned above her as distant explosions echoed through the haze. Crystalline towers, once proud symbols of the Wax's harmony, lay shattered, their jagged remains jutting from scorched earth. Fires raged across the horizon, and the air reeked of ozone and scorched metal. Lyra staggered forward through the ash-laden wind, her heart pounding in her chest. Shapes moved within the smoke, figures locked in desperate combat. Blue energy blades clashed against the searing red weapons of the Trions, their warriors locked in brutal struggle. But no matter how far she ran, she couldn't reach them. Her limbs grew heavy as invisible forces dragged her down, her legs sinking into the ashen ground. Then she saw him. Alpha stood atop a mound of rubble, his armor scorched and battered. His energy blade crackled in his grip as he fought against 3 Trion warriors, their claws and energy weapons tearing at him from all sides. Despite his skill, fatigue weighed on his movements. Blood streaked his armor, and his breath came in ragged gasps. Behind him, the burning ruins of the Wax capital stretched into the horizon, proof of a battle lost. "Alpha!" Lyra cried, her voice lost in the roar of distant artillery. She strained against the unseen force holding her back, but her energy refused to respond. Her heart twisted as Alpha faltered, falling to one knee. The largest Trion warrior, clad in dark crimson armor, raised a plasma spear above his head, poised to deliver the final blow. "No!" Lyra's scream shattered the air as white-hot energy erupted from within her, blinding the world around her in a flash of light. She gasped as her vision snapped back to reality. Her hands clutched at her chest as she struggled to steady her breathing. Sweat soaked her tunic, and her limbs trembled from the surge of power. But even as her pulse slowed, the image of Alpha's defeat lingered, etched into her mind with terrifying clarity. Pressing her palms to the cool crystal floor, she drew deep, steadying breaths. She could still feel the residual pulse of the Nexus core beneath her, a reminder of both her potential and the price of failure. Swallowing hard, she clenched her fists. "This future will not come to pass. I won't let it." Rising unsteadily to her feet, Lyra gazed out of the chamber's crystalline window at the distant horizon, where faint lights marked the training grounds beyond the city. Determination burned within her as she wiped sweat from her brow. "If I am to prevent that future, I must push harder. I have to master the core before it's too late." Without hesitation, she turned and strode toward the vault's entrance, her mind fixed on the days ahead, days she would spend training until her energy answered her call without fail. The fate of Alpha and of all Wax depended on her strength. Part 8. The calm before the storm. On the eve of a mission to infiltrate a Trion outpost, the air buzzes with tension and unspoken fears. Crystalline spires of Wax's capital shimmer faintly against the night sky, their soft glow a fragile beacon against the encroaching darkness. Beneath one such spire, Alpha stands with his gaze fixed on the horizon, shoulders tense beneath the weight of unspoken burdens. Lyra approaches quietly, sensing the turmoil within him. She places a hand on his arm, and the faint pulse of her energy travels through his skin, a warmth that grounds him. Alpha turns, his golden eyes meeting hers, their depths reflecting the silent promise that neither can voice. The distant hum of the city fades as the world shrinks to the space between them. "If we survive this," Alpha's voice is low, roughened by emotion. His fingers brush against hers, hesitant at first, then bolder as they intertwine. "I need you to know. I choose you. No matter what happens. No matter what this war takes from us. You're my reason to fight. Lyra's breath hitches, her chest tightening with both longing and fear. Stepping closer, she rests her forehead against his, their energy intertwining in a delicate current that thrums between their hearts. I'll fight too, she whispers. Not just to save our people, but for us. For the future we deserve. For a moment, time seems to pause. Alpha's hands cradle her face, thumbs brushing lightly against her cheeks. The air between them crackles with unspoken words, with desire held at bay by the weight of war. Their lips meet in a kiss that is both fierce and tender, a silent vow forged in the heart of chaos. As they part, breathless, Lyra presses her palm against his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heart beneath her fingers. No more fear, she murmurs. No more running from what we feel. We face this together. Alpha nods, his resolve hardening. Yet, beneath the steel of his determination lies the unspoken fear that not even love may be enough to save them from what awaits beyond the stars. As the team gathered on the platform beneath Wax's towering crystalline spires, the hum of the extraction ship vibrated through the air, mingling with the distant echoes of the city. The sky above shimmered with violet hues as dawn approached, casting long shadows across the platform's polished surface. Cool winds whispered through the trees, their leaves rustling like distant whispers of a world holding its breath. Alpha stood near the ship's open ramp, his shoulders squared and his gaze steady, yet a storm churned within him. The weight of responsibility pressed against his chest like invisible armor, heavier with each step toward the unknown. His eyes found Lyra, standing at the edge of the platform, her silhouette illuminated by the ship's soft blue lights. Her white and silver combat suit clung to her slender frame, faintly glowing with traces of energy beneath the surface. Strands of her golden hair danced in the breeze as her gaze met Alpha's, steady, unwavering, and yet holding an ache neither could speak aloud. She approached slowly, her footsteps light yet deliberate, until they stood close enough that Alpha could feel the faint warmth of her energy brushing against his skin. For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the hum of their shared connection. Alpha lifted a hand, his fingers brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek before resting gently against her jaw. Lyra, his voice was low, roughened by the emotions he fought to contain. If we survive this, I need you to know. I choose you. No matter what happens. No matter how this war ends. Lyra placed her hand over his, pressing his palm against her cheek as her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. We will survive, she whispered, her voice fierce with determination. I won't let this war steal our future. I'll fight for us. For everyone. Alpha exhaled slowly, leaning forward until their foreheads touched, the warmth of her breath mingling with his. Energy pulsed faintly between them, a gentle resonance that seemed to echo their unspoken bond. His other hand slid around her waist, pulling her close as if anchoring her to the moment. Time seemed to slow, the distant sounds of the city fading into silence. For a heartbeat, there was only the steady rhythm of their breaths and the promise held within their embrace. Alpha, it's time. The voice of Commander Delos cut through the air, firm yet respectful. Reluctantly, Alpha pulled back, his gaze locking with Lyra's one last time. No more words were needed, their hearts had already spoken what neither could fully say. As Alpha turned and strode up the ramp, Lyra watched until the ship's doors began to close, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. The hum of the engines intensified, and the ship lifted from the platform, its thrusters scattering leaves and dust into the air. As it ascended into the sky, Lyra stood unmoving, her pulse steady despite the storm of emotions within. Farewell, but not goodbye, she whispered into the rising wind, the promise carried away into the dawn. As the wax ship sliced through the dark expanse of space, the hum of its engines resonated softly within the hull. Beyond the reinforced windows, stars scattered like distant embers, yet all eyes were fixed ahead, where shadows stirred against the void. The Trion fleet loomed ahead, a blockade of warships arranged with brutal precision. Each vessel's metallic surface shimmered faintly under distant starlight, their massive forms poised with predatory stillness. The largest among them, a dreadnought marked by its crimson-tinted armor and jagged design, anchored the fleet's center like a predator waiting to strike. Inside the wax ship, tension clung to the air. Warriors adjusted their armor, eyes hardened with focus, while technicians monitored energy levels and defensive systems. The faint hum of control panels mixed with the distant thrum of the ship's core, creating a rhythm that mirrored the pulse of anticipation. Alpha stood near the viewport, his gaze locked on the distant blockade. His shoulders squared, but the weight of command pressed against him like an invisible force. The memory of Lyra's touch lingered in his mind, the warmth of her hand against his, the whispered promise that had tethered him to hope amid the chaos of war. Yet beneath that warmth, the echo of her vision gnawed at him, cities in flames, his silhouette standing alone against ruin. "Commander," a voice broke through his thoughts. Kalen, his second-in-command, approached with measured steps. "We're approaching the outer sensor range of the Trion fleet. Energy concealment systems are stable, but their long-range scanners may detect us if we get too close." Alpha nodded, his gaze unmoving. "Maintain course. We thread the void or not at all." Kalen hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the distant blockade. "If they detect us before infiltration." "They won't," Alpha replied, his voice steady. "We've come too far to fail now." The crew exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering behind their eyes. The last mission had cost them dearly, the scars of loss still weighed heavy in their hearts. Yet Alpha's presence seemed to steady them, his determination a beacon against the dark. Alpha turned from the viewport, his eyes sweeping across the gathered warriors. "Remember why we fight," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "Not for conquest or vengeance, but for the future that waits beyond this war. For our people, for those we've lost, and for those we cannot lose." A ripple of resolve moved through the crew. Armor plates locked into place, energy weapons secured, and minds focused as the wax ship approached the edge of the abyss. Beyond the transparent hull, the void seemed to deepen, as though holding its breath before the storm. As Alpha moved toward the command console, his thoughts returned once more to Lyra. Her strength, her determination, it burned within him like a second heartbeat. Yet beneath that fire lay the fragile fear of what the coming battle might cost them both. With a final glance at the distant blockade, Alpha whispered beneath his breath, "Hold on, Lyra. I'll come back to you." Then, with a nod to the pilot, he gave the order that would decide the fate of their world. Into the abyss.